serious subject, getting justice after a reign of terror. An Iraqi refugee is suing Saddam Hussein and his regime for the suspected murder of his father. Haider Jassim saying his father was tortured and killed simply because he was viewed as a threat. And joining us now is the attorney who filed the lawsuit, Bruce Fox, and the man who's looking to take Saddam to court, Haider Jassim. Thank you for being with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Greg.
Haider, what happened to your father at the hands of Saddam Hussein's regime back in 1991?
On April 15, 1991, my father, he kidnapped from Saddam Hussein regime, and they tortured him, and he got killed. And they take everything from all his property. They take everything from us. And they all the time they search the house. They look on his library, and they question me all the time. And after that, we didn't have nothing. Everybody in the country, they was treated my family very bad.
Was
they take everything.
Was his body ever recovered?
His body?
Yes.
No.
You were also threatened and or imprisoned, were you not?
I was in prison in 1997 to 1999. I was because I made a phone call to my uncle. He lives in the U.S.
Why do you think your father was tortured and murdered?
Because my father, he was a famous. He was also a journalist. He was a famous man in all Middle East. And he didn't agree with Saddam Hussein when Saddam Hussein he decided to go to war with Kuwait, and he didn't agree with him. That's what and he was scared of my dad because the people in Iraq, they love my father. He was scared Saddam Hussein, my father, he take of the country from him. That's why he killed my father.
Mr. Fox, nobody even knows where Saddam Hussein is. How are you going to pursue a lawsuit against him and his regime?
We intend to serve the complaint upon various addresses where Saddam and his regime maintained a presence in the U.S., as well as his last known address in Iraq. Sure, it would be preferable to serve him physically, but service on those addresses will suffice for purposes of this lawsuit.
You might get a judgment and an award of damages, but how in the world are you going to collect?
Well, we understand that about $7 billion in assets and funds have been seized from Iraq and Hussein at various locations, various countries around the world, some $2 billion in the U.S. And we would hope that we could recover from some of those assets. And we think it's very important that victims like Mr. Jassim, who have been hurt the most by Saddam's reign of terror, be given compensation, be allowed access to those funds.
The problem, of course, is 7 or 10 or 15 billion isn't a lot of money when you consider all of the various claims out there. I mean, you'd have to establish some priority. Can you do that?
We believe that we can, and we can show certainly that Mr. Jassim's father was a prominent, very prominent person in the Middle East. He could have actually changed the landscape in the Middle East.
Haider, I want to ask you one last question. Why are you doing this? What do you hope to accomplish?
I'm doing the lawsuit because Saddam Hussein, he took everything from my family, and he changed totally all my life because we was have my father, he was a whole house for the family, and Saddam Hussein, we don't want, because now George Bush, he got power for everything, and I hope he pay attention for my case, because I hope my father, he worth more than everything, you know.
I'm sure he will.
That's why.
Your father is Jassim. Thank you very much, Haider Jassim and Bruce Fox. Thank you, both.
Thank you very much.
Now, Saddam Hussein, dead or alive? Still anybody's guess tonight. 2 Arab TV channels aired audio tapes today said to be of Saddam, but experts say they don't think these tapes are new. since the content in them was identical to a tape received by an Australian newspaper back in May. The fact that no one knows where Saddam is, or even if he is alive, is not keeping a Pittsburgh man from filing a lawsuit that's making national news. Money and Politics editor John Delano, also a lawyer, is here to tell us more about that. John.
Ken, this man is an Iraqi native who escaped from Iraq 3 years ago and is living here in Pittsburgh. He is suing Saddam for damages for what he says the dictator and his regime did to him and his family. But whether he actually has a chance to recover any money is a big question mark. His name is Haider Jassim, and he knows the brutality of Saddam Hussein.
They took me, they covered my eyes, they put hand tap on my hand, they took me. They started beating me up, they started questioning me about, like, a lot of questions. What do you know about your father? Who killed your father? I said, I don't know nothing. When they arrested my father, I was 16 years old.
Haider was tortured for 2 years in prison, but nothing compared to what they did to his father, an Iraqi writer who opposed Saddam.
They kidnapped him. He kidnapped and they tortured him. And after that, we heard he get killed.
Leaving behind his wife, 3 daughters, and 2 sons. Now Haider is going to court to get justice, and he's filed a lawsuit in Pittsburgh against Saddam.
The Torture Victim Protections Act was enacted just a few years ago in 1992, and it's been used successfully against a variety of repressive regimes to get compensation for victims of their brutality.
But how do you get money from a former dictator?
It's about $7 billion that have been frozen in countries all over the world, including $2 billion that was frozen in accounts held in the U.S.
Getting that money may be tough.
If you're interested in obtaining a large payout, large amount of cash, you may be able to get a verdict or a judgment for that amount, but it's going to be very hard to actually collect.
Now, there are a lot of hurdles here, from serving legal papers on someone who may or may not be alive to collecting any money in frozen accounts. But if Haider Jassim's case gets lots of publicity, the government may do what it has done for others, pay off the victims, and then reimburse itself from Saddam's bank accounts that it is frozen. Ken?
Interesting. All right, John, and we wanted to know what you think about the lawsuit. In today's exclusive KDKA News poll, 49% of you say it is appropriate for victims of Saddam to sue him. 33% say it is not appropriate.
Now, we continue to follow breaking news. Saddam Hussein may be missing, but that doesn't mean you can't take him to court. And if you suffered at his hands, the motivation for justice is great.
One former Iraqi who lost a great deal at the hands of Hussein now lives in the Pittsburgh area, and he wants that justice. Action News reporter Chris Glorioso joins us now with more on how he's trying to get it. Chris.
Well, this man fled to Pittsburgh to escape Saddam Hussein's brutality. But now that the U.S. government has control of Iraq's assets, bank accounts, and oil, he says he deserves a lot for his suffering and pain. It's an interesting question. Can a U.S. resident file a wrongful death suit against Saddam Hussein?
Hey, we certainly see it.
If you ask Pittsburgh attorney Bruce Fox, he'll tell you yes. Fox says the riches frozen in Saddam Hussein's bank account should be fair game for his client.
My client came to me and said basically he and his family had lost everything. Everything had been taken by him from Saddam Hussein, including their houses, their bank accounts, and their freedom.
And so, from his Pittsburgh office, Fox has filed a blockbuster civil lawsuit against Saddam Hussein, his 2 sons, and the former Iraqi government. Essentially, it claims Saddam should be held financially responsible for killing this man, Aziz Al-Sayed Jassim, an Iraqi journalist who was jailed, tortured, and presumed dead after the Gulf War. Fox represents his son.
Funds have been frozen, and all the major banks in the U.S. that belong to Hussein that were the result of his ill-gotten gains and mistreatment of his people. And we would be entitled to pursue those funds in any event.
And this may be about more than just one lawsuit. If attorney Bruce Fox is successful in winning Iraqi cash and assets for his client, he says you can expect to see hundreds of others who suffered Saddam Hussein's brutality call their lawyers.
I blame Saddam Hussein government. I blame Saddam Hussein government because
31-year-old Abdullah Al-Khazai of Overbrook says Saddam Hussein gave the order to kill his brother, and he has video of Saddam's henchmen torturing him. After hearing of the wrongful death suit, he wants compensation too.
I think every Iraqi person, every single Iraqi person, he deserves, you know, he deserves to sue the Iraq government.
The U.S. Congress is currently debating just how much recovered Iraqi cash should be used to fund the war and the current military occupation of Iraq. Predictably, Attorney Bruce Fox says victims of torture and political killings like his client should get that money before the Pentagon does. Scott?
All right, Chris, and ahead in our next half hour, rebuilding Iraq as American troops are attacked, will we be sending more? And new video of 2 American pilots captured during the war.
Last week it was Boston. This week family's Hempfield Township home in April of 2002. Suing Saddam, if you can find him, a 28-year-old Iraqi man living in Pittsburgh is suing Saddam Hussein and the former Iraqi government. Haider Yassin says the ousted president needs to be held responsible for the torture and murder of Jassim's father, Aziz. Cindy McGrath has more.
Haider Yassin was just 16 years old when his father, Aziz, walked out of their family home in Baghdad and never returned. A family friend saw Aziz Yassin being whisked away by Iraqi officials.
You have to come with us because President Saddam, he wants you right now.
Aziz Yassin was a noted author and political dissident. He was also seen as a potential leader of Iraq if Saddam was ousted from power.
Saddam Hussein, he don't like anybody smarter than him. He's jealous from my father because my father, people love him in Iraq.
For the past 12 years, Yassin has looked for a way to make Saddam Hussein pay for the pain and suffering inflicted on his family. But with most of his relatives still living in Iraq, he was afraid of retaliation. Now, with Saddam's government in shambles, Yassin is looking to ours for a solution.
This is about obtaining justice and recovery and making a family whole that had everything taken from them, including his father's life.
Pittsburgh attorney Bruce Fox says under the Federal Torture Victims Protection Act, Yassin is entitled to compensation from Saddam Hussein. But there may be some practical problems, like finding Hussein, who's been MIA for months.
It would be preferable to serve him physically. We can actually serve him at various addresses that Iraq maintained in D.C. and New York, as well as at his last known address in Baghdad.
Human rights organizations have estimated Hussein's fortune at more than $7 billion. For Yassin, the lawsuit is about the money, but it's also about honoring a man who wasn't afraid to speak his mind, even when it cost him his life.
Saddam Hussein, it's hard to let him get away with that.
Cindy McGrath, Fox 53, 10 o'clock news.
more than 2 dozen U.S. Airways passengers were briefly quarantined.